Today happens to be week 10 of our Sutta exploration series. And for today's Sutta, I picked out one of the suttas that I have found over the years to be somewhat challenging. There are suttas that sometimes we kind of push away. It's too complex, too complicated, or something that is about it that you can't quite verbalize. However, you know at the same time that it is a powerful sutta and it's a very moving sutta. One of the factors that is quite compelling about this sutta is that it repeats, in a sense, the content, the verse section especially, gets to be repeated in not just another sutta, but in 3 other suttas. So we have 3 suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya that bear the same name to some extent. And that is, the term is Bhaddekaratta Sutta. Bhaddekaratta. Now, over the years, many people have translated Bhaddekaratta in certain ways, and they fall into pretty much one major camp in translating it as one auspicious night. Usually that's, or auspicious day. So the one that I picked out is the third of these Bhaddekaratta series, if you will. And they start with the first one, Bhaddekaratta, and then the Ananda Bhaddekaratta Sutta, which is, the first one is 131, the second one is 132, Majjhima Nikāya. And then today's, the one that we're doing, is the Mahākaccāna Bhaddekaratta Sutta. And then there's another one, which is the fourth one, 134, that is the Loma Sakangiya Bhaddekaratta Sutta. So ours will be on the third, which is the one where the bhikkhus go and, as had been the norm in those days when Lord Buddha would leave a teaching in its short summarized version, and he would just get up and leave and go to his kuti. Many times the students would be intimidated, shall we say, unwilling to say, "Excuse me, Bhante, could you please elaborate for us what the verses meant or what the short summary is all about in detail?" So for them, the go-to teacher would be usually Venerable Mahākaccāna. And so, but let's go back to the term Bhaddekaratta. So as I said, it is usually translated as an auspicious day, or in some cases it's called a fortunate attachment, excuse me, and or also an auspicious night is another way of that I've seen it be translated, or a single night's shelter, that's another one. But the one that has these things did not resonate, especially when I was researching it a few years ago when I was doing the recording for the Majjhima Nikāya Suttas. That's where I went with the late Venerable Katukurunde Nyanananda Bhikkhu's translation. And he was par excellence one of the best Buddhist scholars, I would say, scholar slash monks slash practitioner. So for me, that comes pretty, it's up there in the upper tier of teachers in this dispensation of Lord Buddha. So he translates it as the ideal lover of solitude. So the ideal lover of solitude. And that is what I also, copied. I used his rendition, his translation in translating this sutta for our study today. So here we see a sutta that highlights the mind's accomplishment of a person who is delighting in their, if you will, devotion to insight, to wisdom. So it's not just, when we use the words ideal lover of solitude. So sometimes people are pulled back from, what do you mean by ideal lover? So it is the devotional approach to what it means to gain wisdom that we keep talking about. Lord Buddha's dispensation is all about gaining wisdom. It's not about attaining some supramundane states and that's it. Well, there needs to be something that indicates that the person has evolved, or is rather evolving. So in this case, let's break down the words, the root words of Bhaddekaratta. Excuse me. So Bhante is the term that often is used for auspicious, exalted, fortunate, noble even. It's almost like Arya, which is noble, nobility. Eka is one, single, one. And Ratta is seen sometimes as attachment or loving. So this is about the person's journey, spiritual journey towards a state of seclusion, a state of solitude. But oftentimes, whenever we see that word solitude or hear about it, we immediately presume that it is about the physical solitude or isolation of a person. Even though Lord Buddha mentioned about the tremendous benefits of taking care of that part, the physical solitude, but what is being referred to here is the solitude that one can place oneself in away from the hindrances and the defilements or the kileshas. So, as well as the attachment that we have towards the five aggregates. And therefore, that solitude renders itself then as a medium, as a pathway that takes the person straight to Nibbana or liberation. So the commentaries also use Bhaddekaratta as the one who has a fortunate single attachment. So their focus is like locked on in attaining wisdom. But in general, in the commentaries, it represents itself, Bhaddekaratta, as referring to someone who is applying oneself invincibly, unshakably. We're going to see in the verses immovable, which is another term for akuppa. Akuppa. Kuppa is movable, shake, something that can be shaken. And which is the antonym version of it, akuppa means the unshakability of a person's desire to know and studying what is occurring in the present moment. So I don't want to get too much into the Bhaddekaratta other than giving us the somewhat of an understanding as to what the term would mean. As far as one fortunate night or one fortunate or auspicious day, it kind of singles out temporally, like one, in this case, day or one night. However, when a person is tirelessly, we said invincibly, immovably, unshakably, working on this day and night, there goes that theory that this is in reference to one auspicious night, something that happened at one point in time and that's it, that's the end of the story. No. This is what the practitioner is engaged in day and night, day and night. So that's why that translation doesn't work to my understanding, and obviously to the understanding of the great Nyanananda Bhikkhu who passed away a few years ago. So here we see the sage who is at peace, who's developed the practice to such an extent where he or she does not follow after the future, or to go after, pursuing the future, expecting the future to be this or that, putting so much weight on it. And in the same way, someone who also abstains from the mind's normal tendency of just looking back over its shoulder and looking back into the past as to what ifs, how I could have done things differently, etc., etc. This is not the only sutta that talks about this understanding, this definition of solitude. There is another sutta in the Theravada Sutta of the Samyutta Nikāya, which corresponds beautifully with the Bhaddekaratta Sutta series, in the Buddha's emphasis on the solitary dweller, the one who lives alone, where you have this bhikkhu. His name was, he didn't have a particular name apparently. They just, in the sutta, it's just called Thera. Thera means elder. A bhikkhu is normally called the Thera. Who has the higher ordination is called a Thera, an elder. So his name was Thera. So his companions in the holy life see that he eats alone, he goes to Pindapata alone, he meditates alone, he doesn't want to have anything to do with anybody, it seems, living in the forest. So they report him to the Buddha. And Lord Buddha says, okay, go and ask him to come. The teacher calls him. So he goes and, to the Buddha, and he says, Lord Buddha, always, always ask, is this the case? And Venerable Thera, the elder, says, I have the verse here. It says it in verse. It says, alone I entered the village for alms. Alone I return. Alone I sit in seclusion. Alone I pace up and down. Now, the Buddha does not in any way chastise him or, tell him he's wrong, but he doesn't tell him that he's right either. Because as bhikkhus, we're supposed to be also associating with society, with laity, and to share the experiences, the knowledge that we have, and also to allow laity to gain much merits and in the way that they take care of the bhikkhus. So he encourages the venerable by saying, whatever is past, that is abandoned. Whatever is yet to come, the future, that is to be relinquished. And the desire and lust for whatever is taking place in the present, that is brought under control. And in this way, he says that the ideal of solitary living becomes fulfilled in all its details. And two terms that I need you to be cognizant of, Eka Vihari and Sadutiya Vihari. Eka Vihari means or refers to the person who, when they go and whether they live in a monastery, in a cave, in society even, as bhikkhus, they do it by living alone. Living alone here is in reference to not having craving with it, because you can be in a cave all by yourself in the jungles, or in a monastery, living amongst other ascetics, other recluses. But the Buddha's emphasis is not on the physical isolation or solitude. That's why we have the term, the Sadutiya Vihari. He says, for those people, he says, even if they are in the cave by themselves for years, If they have attachments to their craving, to the cave, towards their title, towards the fact that they're different than others, they are not living alone, the Buddha says. They're not living in solitude because they have craving as the second. That's what that means. Eka vihari means living alone, truly. And the Buddha is very clear on this. He says, even if the person is living in the middle of society, but without the craving in his heart or her heart, guess what? They are truly practicing being solitary because they're always watchful on the craving. So that's another thing that really was inspiring to read. So let's jump in. So this is a new translation that I did for our study. So there were some glitches here and there from the recording that I had done. So I wanted to fix that. So Mahākaccāna Bhaddekaratta Sutta, the Mahākaccāna and the Ideal Lover of Solitude. I have personally heard this. Again, this is in reference to Venerable Ananda speaking this out during the first council. At one time, the Blessed One was living in the monastery by the hot springs in the royal city of Rajagha. It was during, by the way, it's a beautiful sight just to see it. If you ever get a chance to go to Rajagha and to see the hot springs early in the morning, I was there a few years ago, and you can see the steam coming off hot springs. They have two sections to it. One is for just the public. It's hardly, I think it's like 1 or 5 rupees, which is nothing. And then there is the one that is, I think they said it's 100 rupee or 150 rupees to enter. That's the one where you see 1 or 2 people in there. In the huge hot spring, but the other one is like crowded with people. So it looked quite crazy, just so much activity going on. But as you're going up, because it takes you, the path takes you all the way, if you persevere, it will take you over the hill all the way up towards the cave where the first council was held. And so they've constructed the beautiful statue of Lord Buddha, a white one, right next to the hot springs. So if you ever get a chance, it's worth going and being there, just sitting there. Venerable Mahākaccāpa's kuti is up there too, right over after you go up the hot springs. It's pretty impressive. Anyhow. I deviate. It was during that time that the Venerable Samidhi, having already risen in the last watch of the night, went to wash himself at the hot springs. There's 3 watches of the night. One goes from 6 p.m., around 6 p.m. to 10. And then the one that goes from then till like around 2 a.m. And then the other one from 2, 3 a.m. down to 6 a.m. So if one is to rest, they usually rest during the middle watch of the night. But sometimes they skip the whole 3 watches and they keep sitting or doing walking meditation. So this is the 3rd watch of the night where the sun is rising or about to. And Venerable Samidhi, just a few words on him. He was born into the royal family of in Rajagha. He was part of the court of King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara was the king who had noticed in one of his excursions out when Lord Buddha was still a bodhisattva, he was a practitioner. But he was so moved by Siddhartha Gautama that he arranged for him he had him follow to see what he does, and then he found out where he stayed, and he went there with his retinue, and he said, "I'm so impressed by you, yogi. I want to give you obviously come from royal blood," he says, from the way you carry yourself. He says, if you relinquish this path, I will give you half of my kingdom. He says, thank you, but I've already left my kingdom to search for the truth, to search for awakening, freedom from dukkha. And King Bimbisara makes a formal request. He makes the request that once Siddhartha Gautama becomes the Buddha and finds the way, the magga, the path to awakening, that he comes back to Rajagaha and teaches him. So that is where what Lord Buddha did after awakening. He came back to Rajagaha and he met with King Bimbisara and his retinue. And that's where Samidhi was, in the crowd, in the royal court committee, whoever went to greet Lord Buddha. And that's where King Bimbisara offered him the Veluvana, the bamboo grove park, to Lord Buddha. So he was so impressed that he there and then asked for ordination. So, and he became one of the bhikkhus. So, and he also was known as Venerable Sariputta's student, Venerable Samiti, that is. So, after bathing, he came out of the water and stood with his underrobe, drying his body. Suddenly, a glorious deva appeared while illuminating the whole of the forest. As he approached, the Venerable Samidhi stood to one side and said, Bhikkhu, do you remember the summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude? Friend, I do not remember the summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude. And in turn, Venerable Samidhi asked the radiant deva, how about you, friend? Do you remember it? The deva replied, Bhikkhu, I too do not remember the summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude. Bhikkhu, you must memorize and learn the summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude, for it is crucial in understanding the fundamentals of the holy life. Having spoken his words, the deva disappeared from there. Later in the day, the Venerable Samidhi approached the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, sat to one side and said, Bhante, earlier today, having already risen in the last watch of the night, I went to wash at the hot springs. After bathing, as I came out of the water and stood with my underrobe, drying my body, suddenly a glorious deva appeared while illuminating the whole of the forest. As he approached me, stood to one side and said, Bhikkhu, do you remember the short summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude? And I answered, Friend, I do not remember the short summary and the detailed explanation, etc. So there's a repeat. And these repetitions are necessary for the repeating bhikkhus, reciters, that kept the suttas alive and brought us here to this point in history, so that they can remember whatever they had skipped, they could recall back. So there's that purpose, and also it allows the meditator or the reader to really grasp what was missed the first time around. And he says, and having spoken his words, the deva disappeared from there. Bhante, please teach me the short summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude. Now, here we, in reading or hearing the words of the deva, one can presume that this was a teaching that had been already provided to humanity. And some commentaries say that the teaching was the ideal lover of solitude was spoken earlier by other other Buddhas, that is, but it's not conclusive. So in this case, we know that Venerable Samidhi didn't know it, and the deva, who knows of the title, of these verses, of this poem, if you will, he had forgotten what the poem was. But he remembered how important it is, and he also remembered the title. Because devas live usually for many, many, hundreds of millions of years in some cases, especially when it's a deva of this caliber who is devoted to the Dhamma, it seems. So here is an opportunity for the deva to come and to reintroduce, if you will, the Bhaddekaratta, because Lord Buddha definitely knows the teaching. So then the Blessed One replied, "In that case, Bhikkhu, listen carefully to what I shall say and pay close attention, for I will teach you the short summary and the detailed explanation of the ideal lover of solitude." Here we go. Do not resuscitate the past, nor expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. The past is over with, and the future has not yet come. But things arising in the present, he discerns with insight as they occur, the immovable, unagitated. He maintains the course of wisdom, steadfast. Today is the time for the work to be done. Tomorrow, it may very well be too late, as death might already be here. For no bargain can be struck with death and its mighty armies. But for him who lives, working by day and by night untiringly, him the tranquil sage has called the ideal lover of solitude. In this particular version of the Bhaddekaratta Sutta, versus the first one, which is Majjhima Nikāya 131, where Lord Buddha does give the same the verses, and then he provides a short summary. But in that one, Lord Buddha applies the five aggregates to explain the verses that we just went through, and especially in connection with not resuscitating the past, nor going after the future. So he uses the Panchakanda, the five aggregates, as his way of explaining what the verses mean. But we don't hear this happen. We don't see this happen in this sutta because the Blessed One, he doesn't explain at all. And as the sutta continues, once finished giving this short summary, the Blessed One arose from his seat and went into his kuti. But soon after the Blessed One had left, it occurred to those bhikkhus, "Friends, the Blessed One has now gone back to his kuti after giving us this short summary, but without giving us the detailed explanation of what he meant by it." And then the whole verse continues, "Do not resuscitate the past." It's a long sutta, so I'm trying to make time for questions and other sections that need explaining. So he says the whole thing, and him, the tranquil sage, is called the ideal lover of solitude. And the bhikkhus reflected, "Now, who could give us the detailed explanation of this short summary?" Then it occurred to those bhikkhus, the Venerable Mahākaccāna is praised by the teacher, as well as considered wise and held in such high regard by his fellow companions in the holy life. The Venerable Mahākaccāna is capable in giving us a detailed explanation for this short summary given by the Blessed One. What if we approached the Venerable Mahākaccāna and asked him about this? Then those bhikkhus went and approached the Venerable Mahākaccāna, and after exchanging friendly greetings with him, they sat down to one side and said, "Friend Mahākaccāna, the Blessed One gave us a short summary, but without giving the detailed explanation for it. And right after uttering his words, he arose from his seat and returned to his kuti. This is the summary of the teaching he gave us. Do not resuscitate the past, nor expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. The past is over with, and the future is not yet come. But things arising in the present he discerns with insight as they occur. The immovable, unagitated. He maintains the course of wisdom, steadfast. Today is the time for the work to be done. Tomorrow, it may very well be too late, as death might already be here. For no bargain can be struck with death and its mighty armies. But for him who lives, working by day and by night, untiringly, him the tranquil sage is called the ideal lover of solitude. Now, we have come asking if the Venerable Mahākaccāna could please provide us with the detailed explanation for this short summary. Then the Venerable Mahākaccāna addressed the bhikkhus thus: Friends, it is much like a man in need of heartwood goes in search of it, and coming across a standing huge tree that is full of heartwood, he ignores the heartwood, the roots, and the trunk, and instead considers the branches or leaves to be its heartwood. In the same way, Venerable Ones, while being face to face with the teacher himself, you have completely ignored him and come instead asking me for the explanation. For he is the Buddha, the Blessed One, who knows and sees. He is vision itself. He is knowledge. He is truth. He has become the Dhamma and is Brahma. He is the teacher, the one who instructs and is the clarifier of meanings. He has given us the deathless. He is the Lord of the Dhamma, the Tathagata. You must have approached the Blessed One and asked the teacher himself, for then it was the right time to ask for the detailed explanation of this summary. And as the Blessed One explains it, so should you remember and bear it in your hearts. Indeed, friend Mahākaccāna, the teacher is the Buddha, the Blessed One, who knows and sees. He is vision itself. He is knowledge. He is truth. He has become the Dhamma and is Brahma. He is the teacher, the one who instructs and is the clarifier of meanings. He has given us the deathless. He is the Lord of the Dhamma, the Tathagata. We must have approached the Blessed One and asked the teacher himself, for then it was the right time to ask for the detailed explanation of this summary. Nevertheless, the Venerable Mahākaccāna is praised by the Blessed One himself, as well as considered wise and held in such high regard by his fellow companions in the holy life. The Venerable Mahākaccāna is capable in giving us the detailed explanation for this short summary. By the way, this is a normal exchange. Whenever somebody, a group of monks or anyone came asking for explanation, elaboration, exposition of any verse, anything that was offered by Lord Buddha in short summary, apparently Venerable Mahākaccāna would, give them this, if you will, scolding, if you will. So it's a recurring interaction between the Venerable Mahākaccāna and the bhikkhus. And we see this in other suttas. One in particular comes to mind, which is the Madhupindika Sutta, which will probably be the next sutta for us to explore. And that is Majjhima Nikāya 18, and which is also in English, it's called Honeyball Sutta. And then we also have the Uddesa Vibhanga Sutta, also from the Majjhima Nikāya, where we see this interaction between Mahākaccāna, almost trying to drive them back, go back to the teacher. But they go on with their request. They're pretty adamant, it seems. We kindly ask that friend Mahākaccāna may not find our request troublesome, and please explain this to us. In that case, friends, listen carefully to what I shall say and pay close attention. Yes, friend, those bhikkhus replied, and the Venerable Mahākaccāna continued. In returning back to his kuti, the Blessed One, not having given you the detailed explanation to his short summary that instructs, do not resuscitate the past, nor expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. And all the way down to him, the tranquil sage, is called the ideal lover of solitude. Now, the way I understand and explain the Blessed One's short summary here is as follows. And how do you resuscitate the past, friends? By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past the eyes made contact with pleasing visible objects and sights. And as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such sights, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. We like to glance forward and backward. We always like to grab the best, the most pleasing with our sight. And the eyes happen to be the loudest, it seems, of the sensory perception, the sense organs, if you will. And that's where we get a lot of the attention that makes us feel that we are living in a world. And if we're not being able to consume enough of things that are pleasant, that are pretty, that are not painful, meaning if things are kind of banal, things are mellow, things are not superlative in their colors, in their loudness, if you will, then we start immediately to look back into the past and try to bring something and making comparisons, compare and contrasting. So if we can recall this, just this much of these verses of this sutta, that's quite a lot. To be mindful of just the eyesight of how much information we bring in, but little to do with what is really happening in front of us. So the looking behind and looking forward or before is similar to looking into the past or resuscitating, reliving the past or being full of expectations when it comes to the future. So let's jump in. And by the way, this is something that is quite visible, especially in the case of meditators, where every sit is rarely just that sit. Every sitting session, every meditation period is rarely just that. We carry so much from the past, meaning past meditation experiences. It's almost like bringing our meditative resume or CV with us when we sit. Well, this is what I had accomplished in my last sit, or the highlight of my sitting history. And so I need to, at the very least, catch up to that or make a repeat of that at the very least. It's only fair. I mean, if I've done it in the past, then I should be able to recapture that, relive that. In other words, resuscitate the past. So it's not just mundane memories that we go and resuscitate, but also the jhanas, for example, or any specific states of mind, even if it's calm. Sometimes you sit and sometimes you're meditating, and from the start you are in a tug of war with your mind. There's agitation. And now we want to get rid of that agitation. Getting rid of the agitation. It's almost like an unwanted offspring, an unwanted something in your life that you want to get rid of. So, but not looking at what's in front or what's in the past we are giving ourselves, offering ourselves unprecedented resiliency and capacity to remain unshaken. Akuppa. Let's continue. By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past the ears made contact with pleasing sounds, and as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such sounds, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past the nose made contact with pleasing scents and fragrances. And as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such smells, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past the tongue made contact with pleasing flavors and tastes. And as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such flavors, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. By the way, I would love for you to listen to these words, if you can, with closed eyes, instead of writing notes, taking notes, unless it's a compelling question that comes up, or moving the body left and right. Imagine if you could be able to just sit. Just sit. These are Lord Buddha's words, carried over through Venerable Mahākaccāna, of course. But even though we're going through the six sense organs, that does not mean that, okay, fine, I heard the one about the eyesight, that should be enough, it's a repeat. Well, we just lost a huge opportunity. Remember the verse that says, be careful, don't postpone for tomorrow, because who knows, that might be too late. So please use these opportunities in hearing the Dhamma as ways, entry points to a deeper understanding of oneself, of your mind and how it functions. Because this is about you, no one else. You, that's it, you. The relationship you have with your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your body, this is about that. No one else. So the bondage that Venerable Mahākaccāna is talking about is not necessarily having to do with the past, but it's more in Pali it's called nandi, or delighting in, being infatuated by, and also the desire and lust that we keep hearing in Venerable Mahākaccāna's explanation, which is a term in English for chandaraga, lust, looking after, desire and lust, so which we get caught up in. So, our tendency to revive, to relive the past, or to relish the past, also involves developing our sense of detachment, even towards any of these experiences, but especially the one dealing with the mind that we're going to see in a bit as a sense organ, because I mentioned about the eyesight being the loudest, but in all, well, when we look at the mind, the chitta or the mano, we see how the eyes get triggered by something, a sight, a beautiful sight, but we're not seeing it anymore. What is the thing that is resuscitating? It's the mind. It's regurgitating what it thought it saw or what it wished it saw. That's when we are lost in the realm of sannyas, sankharas. And that is what we have to be very, very careful for. from being trapped in. And in the Bahya Sutta, it says vinyate vinyatamattang bhavissati, which is in the sense awareness, there will be just the sense awareness. If you remember from several weeks ago, we did the Bahya Sutta, and Lord Buddha said, when seeing Bahya, just see. In other words, if it's no longer in front of you, you're seeing something else. Don't keep on seeing the thing that is already past. So continuing on. By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past, Chandaraga, in the past, the body made contact with pleasing touches and tactile experiences. As a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such tactile experiences, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. By reflecting with delight and lust on how in the past the mind made contact with pleasing thoughts and mental states, and as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such mental states, which traps one in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past to reoccur. In this manner, you resuscitate the past. Friends, it is in this way that one resuscitates the past. So he addressed that portion of the verses. So the eyes, as I mentioned, are very swift, very quick, and very distracting at the same time. And what that means is they're very difficult to become aware of as to where they're looking at, what they're looking at. And that is why we're practicing meditation. When we say mindfulness, what are we being mindful of? So first we use the body. Then slowly, as the mindfulness, as the awareness of the body gets more and more refined and more advanced, if you will, we start to notice other subtle experiences that we hadn't noticed previously. And that can take the awareness into the sense organs. And we can use them because they're part of the body, of course. And then we can look, as it gets more and more refined, we'll see what the sense organ is triggering in the mind, meaning bringing up the three defilements. Basically, the object that we saw, whether beautiful, repulsive, it really doesn't matter. It is just a sight that the eyes captured. The eyes don't care. It is the mind that comes in and puts on the jacket of, I hate this, I love this, onto the sight, onto the object that was seen. Similarly with the other organs, whether it's a sound, whether it's a touch, a flavor. So when a person says, Bhante, I don't know what object to use for my meditation, it's almost laughable, because there's all these objects happening all the time. All we need to do is use awareness as our object. Awareness of all this data coming in. Even when your mind is so agitated and confused, you're still getting a lot of information from the world around you. Watching the mind. Watching how the sannyas and the sankharas are working overtime to translate, to repackage everything that was experienced. And unlike Bahya, putting a storyline to it, adding our own versions of what we are seeing. So, this is helping us to stop the perpetuation of delusion within us. Whether it's seeing an object, hearing a sound, which is another object, etc. So we must ask ourselves, when, for example, seeing an object, what is the mind doing with this sight, with this object, the visible object? What is it doing? Is it still there, even though I walked away from it 10 minutes ago? Is it still lingering? Is it still, am I still like gluey or sticky fingered next to those images that I saw, which now I think I saw, which I convinced myself that that's what it was, even though it might not have been what I saw, what I thought I saw? So, and how long is this occurring? Now, sometimes meditators have the tendency to completely shut it down the moment they become cognizant of this happening. Yes, you are no longer resuscitating the past at that moment. However, you might be also missing an opportunity there because you didn't understand the mechanism of what was happening. And for this reason, sharpening the mindfulness is so key here to understand what happened prior to this. What happened prior to that? What happened prior to this? So you're enhancing your memory capacity to be able to remember. And another word for sati is also memory, by the way, or remembering. So even though it was triggered by the eyes or the eyesight, mind is taken over. The mind has been doing all the work. So now we see his second response, clarification. And how do you not resuscitate the past? By not reflecting with delight nor lust on how in the past the eyes might have made contact with pleasing visible objects and sights. And as a result, consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust, chandaraga again, for such sights. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. In the Vitakka Sutta, Majjhima Nikāya number 20, the removal of distracting thoughts, Lord Buddha describes how whatever such a bhikkhu wishes to think, someone who has reached that state of solitude, whatever they think, whatever they want to think, that's what they think. Whatever they don't want to think, they don't think. I mean, it's so simple. We think we kind of brush it off as, okay, so what? But he has cut off craving. He's ekavihari. He's no longer having craving as the second companion for himself. This person, such a bhikkhu, has gotten rid of the fetter. And by fully understanding conceit, they put an end to suffering. Continuing on, by not reflecting with delight nor lust on how in the past the ears might have made contact with pleasing sounds, and as a result, consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such sounds, and thus one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. And here we're also seeing right effort. Samma vayama of the Eightfold Path, the four aspects of right effort. We're seeing how to stop the unwholesome. Anything that is there that is unwholesome, that has already risen, to prevent it, to eliminate it rather, and to prevent new ones from coming in to arise, and then to bring out the wholesome also is being insinuated here, and then to maintain that, of course. By not reflecting with delight nor lust on how in the past the nose might have made contact with pleasing scents and fragrances. And as a result, consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such smells. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. You can see how Venerable Mahākaccāna was such a thorough teacher. He didn't just say, this is what it is, period. He needs to explain. That's why the Lord Buddha recognized him as one of the 80 foremost students in different capacities. So in his case, he was the foremost in expositing, in classifying, in elaborating and teaching in detail what was taught in short form, summary form. By not reflecting with delight or nor lust on how in the past the tongue might have made contact with pleasing flavors and tastes, and as a result, consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such flavors. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. An example that comes to mind here is when we feel hungry. Notice I said feel, really like with the body, not think that we're hungry. I think at one point previously I mentioned the differences that we all can relate to. But let's say we really do have the hunger and the body needs food. As we're getting closer to the food, whether it's we're shopping for it, it's being prepared, somehow it's there, it's being presented, it's a good exercise to check what is taking place in the mind. Meaning, if it's a food, it's a dish, something that we've eaten before, and the tastes that the flavors that we've tasted in the past from this dish, if they take off in the mind in the sense that, oh, I'm going to taste these flavors now, or I really like this food because of what it looks like it has. If you're a meat eater, for example, and you find a vegetarian meal being presented to you and there's no meat in it, sometimes, people I've seen move their fork or chopsticks around the meal trying to look for those chunks of meat. Is it really hunger at that point? Or is it something else? The mind has taken off into the Disneyland of senses and trying to satiate the senses, the delight, by resuscitating the past. I want to repeat that experience. And here is comparison that also, if I eat this dessert here and I'm in a different place, in a different country, and I've had that same dessert, so-called same, my mind is going in like, that's no way near that other one that I tried there. That was deserving of that title, whatever the dessert is. So we have so many examples of this in comparing and contrasting, which locks us out of living in the solitude that the Buddha is referring to. By not reflecting with delight nor lust on how in the past the body might have made contact with pleasing touches and tactile experiences, and as a result, consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such tactile experiences. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. Here, the mirror is especially a reflective mirror that I'm presuming every one of us has at least one in our household, where we constantly compare this body to the way it was. And we usually have a predominant, one area, one typical part of the body that is really the strongest when it comes to this compare and contrast business, where we look back and say, I remember when I had no gray hair, or my face didn't look so wrinkly, or look at this, look at that, what is this? And there is all this conceit going on. Meanwhile, again, we're wasting a tremendously useful opportunity to look at anicca, to also look at the dukkha that comes along holding the hand of anicca, and seeing that there is no substantiality there. Where do I put the dot and say, this was the beginning of this person, me, I, whatever? There isn't. All based on conditions. It's all conditionality. So in this case, we need to also be understanding and getting a clearer image that mindfulness or sati is a neutral type of activity, if you want to call it that, a neutral. I hesitate to call it indifferent, because that might lead some of us into thinking that it's just careless, or had this, like, you know, very austere, very disconnected, almost non-compassionate, apathetic presence to it, but it doesn't. So that's why I'd rather use the word neutral, or even better, equanimous. It's a plain observation of what is taking place. I know some people might take issue with, why did I say equanimous for sati? Inert, let's just say inert, because equanimity comes in later on through the jhanas. So as I mentioned earlier, sati can be seen sometimes as memory. And you've also heard me many times mention how sanya is also can be considered as memory or memories. So here it is, the distinguishing factor is on the being reminded of the role of detachment from the memory. So sati can be termed as remembering to be mindful. That's another way. Or being mindful, being aware how the mind's attention moves from one thing to the next. That's another way of looking at it. So in that capacity, within those parentheses, yes, it can be seen as memory, but it is not memory as the noun that is used sometimes in relation to sanya, or perceptions, or expectations, or labels. I wanted to mention that because detaching from memory requires not just sati. It does require sati, of course, but detaching from the memory, or sanyas, requires also panya, wisdom, discernment. And especially when we're talking about eliminating, the factor of delight, or chandaraga, and to understand and see the truth, which is always the summum bonum of the teachings, to get the bhikkhu to see sabbe sankhara anicchati, that all things are conditioned. So continuing on, by not reflecting with delight nor lust on how in the past the mind might have made contact with pleasing thoughts and mental states, and as a result consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such mental states, and thus one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences from the past. In this manner, you do not resuscitate the past. So how we resuscitate the past, now we see how not to resuscitate the past. So this is the remedy, the antidote, which we see usually with Venerable Mahākaccāna's explanations. Friends, it is in this way that one does not resuscitate the past. So we're seesawing between the extremes of pleasure, mind experiencing pleasure, and mind experiencing pain, painful, or anything that is even dull. It doesn't have to be painful, but the mind makes it such. So if I'm used to seeing beautiful objects, if every time I'm listening to music and I'm used to listening to beautiful, so-called, whatever that is for me, beautiful music, and every once in a while I hit that dead air where there isn't that exciting, agitating level of colorful music that I would consider beautiful, meaning it's bland, lukewarm, then for all intents and purposes, that might seem very painful for the pleasure-seeking mindset, rather. So what happens is then the person is seesawing left and right. In other words, looking behind and before, in front. And we're caught, we're trapped. So one of my teachers in the past, Venerable Punnaji, used to say, humanity has convinced itself that happiness and pleasure are, they're the same thing, but they're not. And to elaborate his point further, he would say, we human beings live our lives while maximizing on pleasurable experiences and minimizing the painful ones. And that is the pursuit. So however much we have pleasure experiences that are far exceeding the painful ones, that is basically the yardstick of successful living, of happy living, which is completely false. So maximizing on pleasurable and minimizing the painful is quite, it is dukkha, in fact. So, and how do you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future? By hoping with delight and lust for the eyes to make contact with pleasing visible objects and sights in the future. And as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such sights, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. When there is expectation, there is agitation. When there is agitation, there is anxiety in the mind. So that's one of the reasons why we see constantly this term when we talk about restlessness. It's another form of agitation. It's subtle agitation, which can manifest and become much grosser and grosser, visible in the body itself. That we need to really be paying very good attention to, because I've seen people talk about attainments and things or jhanas, and they're referring to a certain level of jhana or even an attainment, first, second, whatever level of attainment, and they're trying to convince someone that they've experienced or they are experiencing that or they're on that level. However, you can visibly see the person becoming agitated or angry or resentful, or physically you can see the flushing of the face and the anger and all that. So, well, that's a telltale sign that the person is completely saturated in the mind with agitation. And I'm not even talking about vyapada or the ill will, dominance in the mind. So when we look at the word immovable or unshakable, akuppa, that means the mind is no longer being perturbed. Akuppa is perturbed, unperturbed. Kuppa is perturbed. So the person doesn't have chandaraga to be perturbed by. So okay, so by hoping with delight and lust for the ears to make contact with pleasing sounds in the future, as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such sounds, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. So this is what leads us to more planning. Another way of saying expectation is another element of that, or an extension, one of its limbs is to plan. The Buddha was never against planning, of course, but how much credence, how much emphasis, how much of our time as one of our greatest assets do we put into this part of our practice, planning or expecting, striving towards something better, always looking for that something better. A good exercise would be if you are, let's say, following social media, for example, or getting emails or getting messages or the news. Watch how your fingers, if I'm presuming you're using a smartphone here, or even cruising through the TV channels, something like that. See how the mind is so agile and so quick in making us be so easily convinced, duped, in fact, to the moment we see that this thing is not that pleasing, we hit the forward button or we swipe in the case of the screen. See how many tries it takes for you to kind of put an end to that and realize what's happening and then putting an end to that. Becoming more cognizant. So we can use these techniques in different ways because we are enmeshed in the delusion, especially now in this time period in the world, simply because we dislike, in fact, we despise boredom. When a student has reached, let's say, a certain level, certain experiences are happening or not, the person comes in and complains, how come this is not happening? That's another way of saying, Bhante, I am bored. How can I move on to the next jhana? How can I move on to this? I've heard these people are having these experiences, so how come I'm not? That's why I am totally against having interviews where students are within, 25 feet of each other. In fact, it's much better if the doors are closed and nobody's in front of the door, because we have a tendency, I've noticed this firsthand with some students overseas in retreats, where the student would get up and pretty much give a repeat account of what they overheard rather, someone else say. So because everybody is not happy where they are, they want to move again to the next, to the other, which is also bhavasava, one of the contaminants, longing for the other, the better, to become into a state that is better and other than this, because we are dissatisfied and disappointed. We want to know what's behind door number 2, number 3, number 4, and the numbers never end. So by hoping with delight and lust for the nose to make contact with pleasing scents and fragrances in the future, and as a result there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such smells, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. By hoping with delight and lust for the tongue to make contact with pleasing flavors and tastes in the future, as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such flavors, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. Whether facing successes or failures or disappointments, these are all our creations ultimately. Whether we're talking about the past, present, or future, we need to be constructing. A fancy word, a Pali word that we could use here is sankharas, yes, but there is a more devious presence, if you will. And those are the papanchas. Those are the actual storytellers, the weavers of different scenarios in the mind. The what ifs, they really take on different nuances, generating new karmas for us, in fact. Because the next moment, the actions that are to happen by my thoughts, my words, my body physically, they're going to be stemming out of where my papanchas have left me, what foundation they gave me, which Lord Buddha consistently says are wrong, because we need to go to the nippapancha state, which is devoid of papanchas. And that is what the arahant is. That's the state of an arahant's mind. They don't have any more papanchas being made. So, in other words, we are karma making machines, karma generating machines. We're just not aware of them. Because as we seesaw between pleasure and pain, what we're dealing with, basically, we're being dealt with, are the hands the three hands of the defilements: lobha, dosa, moha, lust, anger, hatred, and delusion. We're like a volleyball being tossed between three players, if you will. So long as we are being propelled, moved by these three, any of these three, we're going to be continuing to be just karma generating machines, if you will, because we're, consistently designing, creating, fabricating new thoughts, new speech, and new actions tainted by these kileshas. So by hoping with delight and lust for the body to make contact with pleasing touches and tactile experiences in the future, as a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such tactile perceptions, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. By hoping with delight and lust for the mind to make contact with pleasing thoughts and mental states in the future, as a result, this fits beautifully with meditators, by the way. As a result, there arises consciousness that is bound up with delight and lust for such mental states, which traps one in the longing for pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. That's why we need to always start with a beginner's mind. Always. I don't know anything. I just don't know anything. I mean, obviously, you use the techniques as necessary. Just drop back down to your object of meditation. And without having any demands, the mind will remember what is natural for it, what state it is more convenient for it, what is really, really comforting, unagitated. The mind doesn't want to be agitated. So, but it requires that trust from our side so that we don't push it left and right. So in this manner, you expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future, he says. Friends, it is in this way that one expects or becomes anxious for what may lie in the future. And how do you not expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future? By not hoping with delight and lust for the eyes to make contact with pleasing visible objects and sights in the future. And as a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such sights. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. It's like speaking to a loved one, or rather listening, being with them. And you've been with them, let's say, yesterday or last week, and now you met them again, but somehow the last encounter you had just left you in such a state of joy because of what they said, they did, they expressed. And the whole week you've been carrying that with you, that tune. And today you see them again. Can I stop myself from hoping that my friend will be saying those same things as they did last time I saw them, or expressing or doing something that moved me so much? This is when I bring the attention back to where it needs to be. Not necessarily the words that are coming out of my friend's mouth or the expressions, but what these things are triggering in my mind. Because I will not be able to see my friend, even though they're sitting a few inches away from me. And I can see they're there, but I can't see them. So looking with so much expectation or anxiety to the future is not seeing life happen. And that's why Lord Buddha says, be careful, tomorrow may never come, because death might be waiting for you with its mighty armies. And there's no way of bribing death. No way. By not hoping with delight and lust for the ears to make contact with pleasing sounds in the future, as a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such sounds. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. By not hoping with delight and lust for the nose to make contact with pleasing scents and fragrances in the future. As a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such smells. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. Um, in the Sutta Nipata's Nalaka Sutta, there's a verse that says, if you delight in being alone, then you will illuminate the 10 quarters. I just found it to be, it's like capturing the essence of what Venerable Mahākaccāna is talking about, what Lord Buddha is saying, the ideal lover of solitude. So if a person truly is able to delight in what is happening now, boredom and all, even when the mind is agitated, can I be okay with that? Can I be able to observe that? Because you'll be able to understand, and through that understanding, detached understanding, I'm observing it, neutral, as it's happening, because it is conditional. Perhaps something happened, perhaps I stubbed my toe, perhaps something happened, something startling. The ideal lover of solitude is one that is not concerned about what is still reverberating in the air around oneself, but what is happening, reverberating inside the mind, the attitude. So there's also in the Therigatha, Therigatha is a book that kept on being added sections to it, even after the first council, and it comes from the Khuddaka Nikāya. And there is one verse, say, from the brother of Emperor Ashoka, who also became a bhikkhu and became an arahant, in fact. And he was being, the emperor's brother. So he was constantly surrounded by guards, attendants, you name it. So he has, in his Therigatha verses, he says, when there is none to be seen in front or behind, one is greatly at ease as one dwells in the forest all alone. This is about the forest, yes, but not only about the forest, if we've been listening to what Venerable Mahākaccāna was saying all along. So there's the Ekavihari, which is completely independent of what state, physical state, one might find oneself. You might be in a busy subway, and you might be in that state. But you might be living surrounded by bhikkhus, an abbot somewhere, in a monastery, in a cave, on Pindapada, by yourself, barefoot, walking. But the mind might be lost in craving, which means craving as the second. So this person is not the ideal lover of solitude. So, by not hoping with delight and lust for the tongue to make contact with pleasing flavors and tastes in the future, and as a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such flavors, and thus one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. So we need to be truthful and honest first and foremost within ourselves and the intentions while seeking a monastic lifestyle, for example, because I've had many individuals recently reach out to me asking what steps they need to take in order for them to start that path, moving away from lay life. So pursuing the solitude. And that is my warning as it was for myself as well, before becoming a monastic for over 30 years, when life situations were not allowing me to become a bhikkhu, one of them being my father's illness. But I once heard a monastic tell me laughably, when I said, "Oh, I can't wait to be a bhikkhu," and things. And they laughed and said, "Do you think that you're going to have more time to meditate? Do you think you're going to have more time for yourself?" And I said, "Well, that's the idea." And they laughed and they said, "Good luck. You're going to have so many responsibilities, this and that." So I took it with a grain of salt, realizing that there was some truth in what they were saying. So we need to understand, therefore, that is it truly ekavihari, or is it taking craving with me as the second? So I'm not truly dwelling alone. So that is, basically it's asking, is liberation, nibbana, within the crosshairs of my mind? Is that my target? And nothing else. Because we can be easily distracted by the appearances, by the rites and rituals, by the appearances, by the looks, by the outfit, by the robes, even though it doesn't have any style to it. It's a 2,600-year-old fashion, as Bhante Gunaratana would say. So what is it, the goal of the person in seeking solitude? If it's anything short of nibbana, then it's not the right reason. Then the person must reconsider with such a choice, in my opinion, because I don't buy into, well, there can be two kinds of bhikkhus. One is the scholar, just that, and the other one is the meditating bhikkhu. That is, I've never seen Lord Buddha mentioning or legitimizing such a claim. Once we become monastics, the goal, the sole goal, needs to be not building a monastery, not having, the position of an abbot or such a huge gathering of followers, none of those things. Primary goal, foremost, has to be one's own liberation and what one can do in the meantime, along with that effort. So that is if we want to be on the path laid out by the great teacher himself. So, by not hoping with delight and lust for the body to make contact with pleasing touches and tactile experiences in the future, as a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such tactile experiences. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. By the way, we don't have that much left, so we're almost nearing the end of the explanation. So I know it's a long one I mentioned. By not hoping with delight and lust for the mind to make contact with thoughts and mental states in the future. And as a result, the consciousness does not arise that would otherwise be bound up with delight or lust for such mental states. And thus, one does not get trapped in the longing for the pleasurable experiences to occur in the future. In this manner, you do not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. Friends, it is in this way that one does not expect nor be anxious for what may lie in the future. And how, friends, do you falter, getting lost in whatever arises in the present? Friends, when the eyes and visible objects arise together in the present, if there is delight and lust for pleasing visible objects and sights, then the consciousness that follows becomes bound up by delight and lust, taking pleasure in what is being seen. In this manner, you falter, getting lost in whatever arises in the present. So having the unagitated feeling while being neutrally mindful is the best place to be in the present. So even if there's delight coming up when you're tasting certain food, for example, is mindfulness there, checking it out, observing it? Is mindfulness there, catching yourself when hatred comes up, when you start judging yourself because you were attached to the sense perception? So nothing escapes the eye of sati, not the eye of the big brother, that's so our own sati is the best. So this is another way of saying harmonious lifestyle or right livelihood that we see in the Noble Eightfold Path, associating with wise individuals that can get us back on track with our practice, enhancing our sense of presence and strengthening our awareness of what is taking place in the present. The help of a teacher is exquisitely helpful in this. So, and when the ears and sounds arise together in the present, if there is delight and lust for pleasing sounds, then the consciousness that follows becomes bound up by delight and lust, taking pleasure in what is being heard. In this manner, you falter, getting lost in whatever arises in the present. And when the nose and fragrances arise together in the present, if there is delight and lust for pleasing smells, then the consciousness that follows becomes bound up by delight and lust. That is ayoniso manasikara. There's yoniso manasikara, which is wise, reflective attention, and ayoniso manasikara, because there's the prefix, it's the antonym of that, which means the unwise attention. Where it doesn't reflect and it just gets pulled in. The people at Facebook, people on YouTube, and all the mass media and everything dealing with putting stuff in front of the public, they are excellent. They are experts at creating ayoniso manasikara, to drag your attention, wise reflection, to in fact eliminate it, not to give you the time of day where you can pause for a millisecond. That's why muting the sound is helpful. In fact, if you can completely turn it off, get rid of your TV usually helps. So we need to inculcate, bring out more yoniso manasikara. So taking pleasure in what is being smelled, in this manner you falter, getting lost in whatever arises in the present. And when the tongue and flavors arise together in the present, and the same goes, I'm just going to jump through because these are the repeats, even though I know for some of you it's nearing midnight, if not already midnight in different parts of the world. So I have recorded the whole thing, of course, the other version of my translation, but I'll just jump through these different senses for time constraints. And when the body and touches arise together in the present, and when the mind and thoughts arise together in the present, one becomes bound up by delight and lust, taking pleasure in what is being experienced. In this manner you falter, getting lost in whatever arises in the present. Here, Sila before everything. When I say here, in the Dhamma, I mean Sila must come before everything. And including, and especially in the case of our thoughts, that's where Sila gets to be broken first, and then the speech, and then the action. So we need to investigate. So Sila, proper application of Sila requires investigation, and investigation requires yoniso manasikara, which is wise reflective attention, and which itself requires sati, which requires, along with it, panya. So Sila encapsulates all of them. Yes, it's a moving from the outside in, but still it's very powerful because it trains, it tames the mind to seek more and more states of non-agitation, to find comfort in that, if you will. So continue on. So friends, it is in this way that one falters and getting lost in whatever arises in the present. And how, friends, do you not falter as you remain immovable, discerning with insight whatever arises in the present? Friends, when the eyes and visible objects arise together in the present, and similarly with the ears and sounds, similarly with the nose and smells, similarly with the tongue and flavors, and with the body and tactile objects, and then finally with the mind and concepts, then there is neither delight nor lust for pleasing experiences. Then the consciousness that follows is not bound up by delight nor lust, therefore not taking pleasure in what is being touched, what is being smelled, what is being seen, what is being heard, what is being cognized or known in the case of the mind. In this manner, you do not falter as you discern with insight whatever arises in the present. So, friends, it is in this way that one does not falter, as one remains immovable, discerning with insight whatever arises in the present. Friends, this is how I understand and explain the Blessed One's short summary, which states, do not resuscitate the past, nor expect or be anxious for what may lie in the future. The past is over with, and the future has not yet come. But things arising in the present, he discerns with insight as they occur. The immovable, unagitated. He maintains the course of wisdom, steadfast. Today is the time for the work to be done. Tomorrow, it may very well be too late, as death might already be here. For no bargain can be struck with death and its mighty armies. But for him who lives, working by day and by night, untiringly, him the tranquil sage has called the ideal lover of solitude. Well, a valid question might be posed here, which is, well, what is it that disturbs our freedom from experiencing this solitude? Well, you remember the 5 aggregates? The 5 clinging aggregates disturb our natural freedom that comes from true solitude. They're always there trying to get our attention. They're always there to disturb us, pulling us out of our sit, for example. The body aches. This is my body. If I don't get up, my legs are going to fall off. Really? Really? If I don't move my body this way, my hands are going to fall off. Now, of course, sometimes the legs get numb or because of constriction of the blood and all that. So we need to be cognizant. But usually, the 5 aggregates, the grasping aggregates, are the ones that make us be shakeable, which is the opposite of akuppa. So we become movable. They're the ones that pull us out of solitude. And the solitude, again, is not, we shouldn't think about it as physical solitude, although the Buddha highly encouraged that. With every single reference to the jhanas, the bhikkhu always is isolating, secluding oneself from the senses, from sense pleasures. So seclusion is always there to some extent, but it is not that mandatory all the time to bring about this sense of the ideal lover of solitude. That's what I'm referring to here. So now, friends, if you wish, please go and approach the Blessed One and ask him about it. And as the Blessed Lord explains it to you, you should listen carefully, remembering and bearing it in your hearts. Yes, friend, replied those bhikkhus, delighting and grateful for the words of the Venerable Mahākaccāna, as they arose from their seats and went to the Blessed One. And after paying homage to the teacher, they sat to one side and then recounted all that had taken place, while adding, Bhante, having requested from him, the Venerable Mahākaccāna explained in detail the short summary you had given us, which he did in this manner while using these words and phrases. In hearing their words, The Blessed One replied, Mahākaccāna is wise, bhikkhus. Mahākaccāna possesses penetrating insight. If you had approached me asking for the detailed explanation to this summary, I would have explained it in the exact same manner as did Mahākaccāna. For that indeed is its meaning, and that is how you should remember and bear it in your hearts. This is what the Blessed One said, and those bhikkhus were even more delighted in hearing the teacher's words. If you want to experience vision of the Dhamma, then we must first be looking. Vision, looking. Sometimes we want something, but we're not putting any energy. We're not even gearing ourselves up in that direction, working in that direction. So, as I was mentioning earlier, the intention must not be short of full, complete liberation, because time is running out. When you wake up in the morning, can you wake up with your attention on the very first breath that comes into view when you wake up? Meaning, is the first breath taken with full awareness? And not the thoughts that come cramming in, barging in, memories, whatever, experiences. Can I take mindfulness with me to bed? That would be another question. Or when I go to work. So, being aware of the power that perceptions have in using these color brushes on reality, altering it, causes us to always check in with our sankharas. And what is the nature of our sankharas? In other words, sometimes you've heard me use the word attitude. What is my attitude towards my experience? And because ultimately what Lord Buddha is saying is, reject all mental phenomena, whatever it is. So long as it's not full nibbana, reject them all. Don't pitch your tent anywhere until it's full nibbana. Of course, you need to be communicating with someone, a teacher, who can guide you using those signposts, these experiences, these hurdles, explaining them, clarifying them. You're doing the work though. So ultimately, our journey must take us to that state of akuppaceto vimutti, the unshakable, unperturbed liberation of the heart, nibbana. So that is the ideal lover of solitude, to my understanding. And I hope this today's sutta exploration helped in understanding that a little bit better, perhaps. So I will pause and ask for if there's any questions and comments. I would hope there are some.
Bhante?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. First of all, for reading that translation, actually. It was quite interesting to see what difference somebody who has translated it while clearly practicing can make on the words of the sutta, because it was much easier to understand than the versions I'd been, well, the one version I'd been listening to, no, not listening to, reading on Sutta Central. So yeah, so first of all, thank you for that. The sutta it reminded me of, in some ways, of one of the methods of practice I've been following, based on the turtle simile, which you've read yourself on the YouTube videos. And what question sort of brought to mind is, you're quite an advocate of a genuine smile with this practice. I'm a bit unsure where the two sort of meet really, and is the smile really an aid to help bring up this joy inside, so you don't have to necessarily keep going outside? Is that part of it? Yeah, I guess that's my main question actually. Yeah.
This is a question that comes up about the genuineness of the smile. As you know, you've heard me say how important the smile is, yes, but it could easily be a genuine tear. We can't always be smiling, otherwise there's something seriously wrong with us. We need to find a DSM code for you. But we go through fluctuations of emotions, different things happening given the circumstances. So long as we're not arahants, of course. But even arahants sometimes cry. They do, when they're trying to express the beauty of the Dhamma. So, so even in a tear, a moment of genuine tearful state, but not overwhelmed with your mind becoming agitated, where there can be a complete embodiment of compassion within you, towards you, or towards someone else. That also has, the way I understand it, the genuineness, the quality of genuineness, as does the genuine smile that I keep referring to. So sometimes it doesn't have to be such a wide smile, for example. It might be just, if you're wearing, I'm exaggerating here, a tight pair of shoes, or you've been wearing your shoes all day and you take them off after having stood on your feet for all day. How do your feet feel? Doesn't that give you a sense of comfort? I would say yes. And is that a genuine sense of comfort? Again, I would say yes. So can you wish that upon yourself? And when you're cognizant that, okay, I'm trying to generate the smile, it feels almost fake. In fact, I'm like, I'm manufacturing it almost. And that is something that, of course, I don't advocate for, and I try to help the person not do that anymore, and bring in more of an awareness to, okay, what's happening? Can I have compassion towards myself as one side of my brain keeps pushing and bullying basically me to start smiling, basically. I can't go around and tell people, hey, how come you're not smiling? You should smile. Meanwhile, I'm not smiling. I've seen that quite a bit. And it's comical and sad. So I'd rather have the person be aware, neutral, in a neutral fashion, of what is taking place. That is like the preparation ground. That is like washing the plate before you, and drying it and placing it and making it ready for the meal to come. That's where, how I understand the genuineness quality play into this. How is this, does this?
Yeah, it definitely, like that sincerity and like the softness and the gentleness, which is like intricately tied in together. Yeah, that does it. It makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you, Bhante.
I'm glad.
Can I comment?
Yes.
I found that if I let joy arise, a slight smile just comes naturally. And I believe the Buddha did say we should cultivate the awakening factors, and joy is one. And if you let go of hindrances, it just comes. That's my comment.
Yes, absolutely. When it comes, right? And it's a beautiful welcome for it. Um, but we're not always functioning. Not all of us are functioning with the seven factors of awakening all the time. Sometimes we have to kind of almost feels like we're starting all over again from scratch. The mind likes to deceive us, even if the person has been, in lofty states, let's say. Uh, but it happens because you're dealing with sankharas. And we have so many countless eons of lifetimes where we've collected many sankharas. That's why it's pointless to sit down and engage in argumentation with oneself and trying to eliminate or try to go after the sankharas. However, a way to address it would not be wise, let's say, if one would go about it as forcing a smile upon it, because like any of the seven factors, the satta bojjhangas, they arise naturally. Of course, we prepare the ground for them, but they are working. It's not for example, the satta bojjhangas, the piti factor that you mentioned, the joy factor or rapture, as some people call it, is a higher quality of joy. It is the highest, in fact, quality of joy that a human being or a being could experience. But prior to that, there's different levels of joy that have unfolded in the person. Now, sometimes the person is so far away from that, and it could happen very quickly, instantaneously, but they are not on uh, they're not standing at the right doorway, if you will. They don't have the right attitude because there's a sense of compulsion, there's a sense of beating oneself down, refusing whatever state they're in by bringing in joy. And how come I'm not feeling the joy? I should be smiling. There you go. That is not the satta bojjhanga's piti. No way. That's the surest way of not experiencing it, in fact. So when the person, however, develops that empathy towards oneself by accepting, whether it's tears, whether it's a smile, whether it's forgiveness, whatever it is, there's an opening. There's a softness, like you mentioned earlier. There's a softness. And suddenly the mind, especially if they have experienced the satta bojjhangas in the past, suddenly recalls those states. And even the jhanas could come in. And lovely visitors. But there has to be the soft acceptance of what is taking place because if I am bringing in, I should be feeling this way, that is either resuscitating the past or expecting something from the future. Basically, I'm not the ideal lover of solitude. So I'm not the Bhaddekaratta at that moment. So yes, absolutely, satta bojjhangas are, in fact, once they're all balanced, that's where nibbana occurs. They have to be there. But we have to start from somewhere, and that somewhere needs to be drenched with acceptance and genuineness, the way I understand it. Thank you. Other thoughts, comments?
Bhante.
Yes.
Thank you. This is sort of a naive question, but I think that, in the daytime, it's possible either to, suppress or repress, whether it's a negative attachment to the past or certain type of expectations of the future. But my question is, and then you did mention, mindfulness before sleeping. My question is, I noticed that in dreams, however, it's very hard to control, and most dreams do deal with either revising the past, remembering the past, or altering the future. And those are a little bit hard to control, and none of them, hardly any of them, deal with just, the present reality. I would say about, 80% of them might deal, whether it's remembered or not, they do deal with some version of the past, usually a revision of it or something.
Yes.
And so, as I said, in the daytime, I think it's possible to, for instance, just to exaggerate, I mean, I probably won't kill or, I would try to follow the 5 precepts in the daytime, but in my dreams, well, all hell breaks loose. And I just can't, I know that it does.
Yes.
Even though I could hardly remember. So
I see your
I
point.
was wondering, there's this sort of, struggle. So I was wondering, is there any kind of techniques to, not to subdue the dreams, but to, maybe make them go on a somewhat different path?
Yes.
Thank
well,
you.
Yes, it's actually a very good question. I appreciate that. The different teachers have mentioned different things. For example, with 2 great teachers whom I respect tremendously. One is Ajahn Mun, and the other one was Ajahn Mahabua, his student. Both of whom have taught their students that the students need to practice as sati, sampajanya, mindfulness, throughout the day, and to such a point where they're doing walking meditation, sitting meditation, even lying down meditation. But when the moment comes where the person is so exhausted that they need to go to sleep, they give you a waiver. They give you like basically a permission in a sense where it's okay for you to have those memories coming up. And because yes, they do, because and that's why I'm not a big fan of suppressing to begin with. But again, so they basically say that it is okay during those hours for you not to be aware. Now, that doesn't say that they themselves lived like that, because they were excellent teachers and practitioners at that. We have examples, and I also my experiences have been in a way where you can carry mindfulness with you if it has been with you throughout the day, so long as there's no suppression, or you're seeing the suppressing dynamics take shape in the day. So at that point, sleep does not necessarily become a form of escape where you can finally go, oh God, thank God, I'm tired. So now I'm going to not be practicing sati, which oftentimes is the case with many practitioners. However, if a person is able to carry their mindfulness with them all the time, having the Dhamma in their heart all the time, thinking about Sila, for example, one of the first ways that they could start seeing that sati is with them is through their adherence to Sila while asleep. While asleep. I have students who have begun experiencing that, where they see a situation, let's say using your example, they're about to kill someone in the dream. They stop. If they're holding a weapon, they throw away the weapon. And that is the first, to my understanding, experience where the person brings mindfulness even into your sleep or dream state. And it can grow to such a point where the person can identify even the kileshas starting to come in. So in such instances, the mindfulness is almost 100%. And it's only a matter of refining it. And there's even cases where individuals can have insights while asleep. And this is not just a lucid dream situation, but they're asleep, where there's insights coming in and out. Suttas are playing. So how much of an authenticity is there in the practice of the person? Now, of course, the Buddha did not expect every student of his to be able to do that. That's why some of the Adi Asavakas have given that window of rest. And there's even Vinaya rules, let's say, if a person has some type of, temptation-ridden, shall we say, dreams, things like that, the person is forgiven because they were simply in a dream state. So there are these things that we need to be looking forward to, shall I say, that really can take the practice to a deeper level. So I hope, without going into too much details, of course, too many details, I hope that kind of addresses your question.
No, thank you. You know, one technique I use, maybe it's a little bit cheating, the merit of compassion, where you start out with, yourself and then the families and teachers. And then by the time it reaches the devas further down, then I'm kind of asleep, I'm listening to it. Sometimes I do that because, it kind of gets my mind, in wider circles as it kind of expands and expands. And
yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you.
Of course. It would be lovely, though, to get to see the devas smiling back at you when you're sending them loving kindness, instead of getting knocked out right at that point. So, but at least you're going to get a restful night's sleep. But the key thing to take from what I was saying earlier about being mindful when you wake up and taking mindfulness with you to sleep is to limit the gaps of unconscious states, or where if you're unconscious, chances are ayoniso manasikara is going to come in, meaning the unwise attention is going to come in and take you away to different defilements. Having said that, there are teachers who advocate for not sleeping. Remember the 3 watches of the night I mentioned, where the middle is usually kept for sleeping, for some that is. There would be nights where the Lord Buddha would not even sleep. And it's one of the kammatthana or the dhutanga practices, austere practices. And the late Webu Sayadaw, Burma, he was a big advocate of not sleeping and not lying down. So he would allow himself to sit, to walk, and to sit meditation, walk and stand meditating. But he would not allow himself to lie down. And he would constantly be in meditation. So you have that also. And he didn't die. He lived like that after he became an arahant. I believe he lived like that for the rest of his life. And he was rather young when he became an arahant. And you see, fortunately, we have videos on YouTube of him. It's unfortunately not, he never spoke in English, but you can see how austere, how strong, even his physique was so like, he didn't look like he was deficient in rest or something. He was so present. So sometimes we, just like eating 3 times a day, which is a myth, we've been taught certain things like you need to sleep this many hours. etc. I tried going without sleep for several days and I didn't die. It definitely helps your vidya and the mindfulness gets sharper. So I'm not saying go without sleep, but slowly pushing that envelope is not a bad idea. Oh, how do you, Terry, you had a question. How do you, I'll say it so that, how do you spell the name of the Ajahns? Oh, Ajahn Mun. Mun is, sometimes people say Mun. It's M-U-N. And the other Ajahn is Ajahn Mahabua, M-A-H-A, long A. Bua, I've seen it spelled with B as in boy, double O, W-A, or in some cases B as in boy, U-W-A. Yes. And they're one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest teachers of the 20th century that we have had the good fortune of having. So
I apologize. See, I couldn't write it down in time.
Ajahn Mun, M-U-N, and the other
I
one,
got that.
Mahabua, B-O-O-W-A.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, questions? I once had a person, a Buddhist, a very devout supporter when I was in New Zealand, I believe. And he came to me and he said, I wasn't a Bhante then, and I had just given a Dhamma talk. And he came and he said, I have a question about this very troublesome sutta. And he says, why did the Buddha teach it 4 times? And I said, which sutta are you talking about? I said, the Bhaddekaratta Sutta. Why was there a need for the Buddha to teach it 4 times? I think that was his main question, but actually they're not taught by the Buddha 4 times. The first time the Buddha taught it, the second time it's Venerable Ananda teaching it to the students, to the other bhikkhus in fact, and then Lord Buddha comes in, I believe, and he says, who was teaching you the Bhaddekaratta Sutta today? And they say it was Venerable Ananda, and he repeats what he taught. And then there's this one, the third. And then there's the fourth one where in Loma Sakangiya Sutta, where we see another Deva, or it might be the same Deva, who comes and asks this bhikkhu about this sutta. And Lord Buddha addresses, explains it to him. And I love to touch upon these suttas that I don't see them being mentioned enough, and how important they are, especially now because we are caught in this perplexed, confused world that we're living in, perhaps more so than ever in documented human history, where there's so much going on, so much confusion, and we need to apply wise reflection and investigation.
These are very timely for me because my mind has always been wandering, thinking about the past or future, caught up in delusion. So these lectures have been very, very timely for me personally. I had one last question. Where can I find, or where can we find written versions of your translations?
Oh, the ones that I made.
Mm-hmm. Because it'd be nice to refer back to them and study them. I can't remember like I used to.
I see. Well, because of my schedule being so difficult in doing so many different things, and sometimes the translations, like even today, as I'm reading the translation that I finished recently of this, I caught certain typos. And then I have to change it in mid-sentence, as it were. But what I can do is I can have some of them be, at least the ones that, some of the ones that we've covered here during these series, I can have them be emailed to you. Dhammadina could probably send them to you guys so you can have access to them.
You want our email addresses, or?
No, she already had, you're, I think you're on the list.
Yeah, the notices so it's suited to read. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So if there are no more questions.
May I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
When you were talking about the solitude, and one thing you say is that when we are meditating, all these memories enter. So unless it's the memory that has to do with being mindful, always being mindful, all these other memories that we had put so much stock in, you know, that we must remember our parents, we must remember that they are not necessarily beneficial or important to our sit. And I was just wondering that so many people who are getting older, they worry so much about, you know, getting Alzheimer's. That's the biggest worry. So would you say that according to this path to your practice, it's no big deal to worry so much about if you're losing that kind of memory, as long as you remember to be mindful? So.
Yeah. I mean, sooner or later, we're going to be dead, right? Memory or no memory. So might as well live with some attention, some joy of really being present in the thing that is being experienced, rather than latch on or try to frame the present moment somehow while using any of the six sense organs, and then replaying that in my head and saying, yes, that was a lovely meal, that was a lovely encounter. And every time you go, you re-embellish it somehow, adding certain nuances to it. Meanwhile, you're completely missing out on what's underneath you, what's happening. So Alzheimer's, I don't know if there's been any research on the role of wise reflection being utilized by meditators, for example, in slowing down the Alzheimer's impact on the mind, on the brain rather. But to me, that is not that important, because I wouldn't even say that it is the biggest fear, Alzheimer's, for a person advancing in years, getting older. It could be being hit by a bus as you're crossing the street. What happened to that? We'd like to highlight certain things that are getting a lot of attention in the media and things, in articles. And death is always there, irrespective of how it comes, what flavor it comes in with. And we cannot renegotiate, we cannot bribe the armies of death with wealth, with this, with outsmarting it. You can protect yourself as much as is possible, whether it's rest, nutrition, what you expose your eyes to, your senses to. But I think the common denominator, whatever we come back down to, we have to circle back to the drain that is mindfulness, and being as alive when the present moment is taking place, instead of smearing it with elements from the past, meaning resuscitating the past, or expectations, meaning anxieties of the future, because we are going to be hit 100% of the time with disappointments vis-a-vis the future. It will never unfold the same exact way as we want it to. In fact, oftentimes it will be the opposite. But what happened there? What was lost? That moment, that present moment, which is now a past, is lost. Because it continues to be lost. Because we like to relish, we like to relive, whether it's the memories of parents, because, okay, which parents are we going to be, let's be fair, which parents are we going to remember? This one, this last couple who raised us in this body, which by the way, the body changed, or the countless parents that we've had. Why be unfair towards them? Probably some of those parents were much more loving than this last couple that we encountered. So in that sense, it becomes irrelevant. However, when there is a moment of awareness and it is pure, it is genuine, it also brings about a sense of empathy, which brings about a sense of equanimity eventually, which is one of the Brahma Viharas. It's the highest Brahma Vihara, in fact. Divine abiding, from which you will, just like in the Sutta Nipata section that I read, where it says the person who is living truthfully in solitude, in the mind, is one that is permeating, is one that is a person that is reflecting, radiating love, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and especially equanimity in all the 10 directions. You don't have to necessarily remember, because that will create agitation in the mind and guilt. Definitely guilt if you suddenly remember that, ooh, I didn't recall my grandmother today. There goes, we just added a wave on this placid lake surface. And the more agitation there is, the less you are present to what is happening. Your eyes are not seeing what is happening in front of you. They're replaying. Constant replay, which is a wasting of time, which also pulls the rug from underneath our sense of so-called identity that we've established for ourselves after 50, 60, 80 years, whatever, which many of us don't want to let go of, which is a big problem. But that opens up a totally new discussion or an added 1 hour discussion. So, but I hope that helps.
Would you say the same thing about history? Also, like, not that important to remember the history, because history is in a form of memory, right? That we always feel that it's important to learn the history. So how would the Dharma look at things like, remembering what happened, remembering?
It will pick on what you said. Learning from history.
Mm-hmm.
Learning from history. But we need to be honest when we say history. Whose history?
Mm-hmm.
What history? Whose version of history? Because history is being taught in multiple universities around the globe. There's so many different versions of history, and that is only the printed ones that was written by the conquerors. So which version of history are we talking about? So, but yes, learning from history and then just dropping it so we don't repeat it. We don't live in it. Because now I'm making history if I'm living in the present, truly. So with that, let's share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I hope these continue to help your practice. Your understanding of the Dhamma gets deeper, and feel free to replay them, or because there's always something that we gain. Read them again, listen to them again, because every time we listen, we gain so much. But listening again, like that empty plate or empty bowl, without expectations, without this is how it's supposed to be, this is what this word's supposed to mean, etc. So leaving our own conceit and everything else out. The Dhamma is humbling if we practice it with our hearts and place the Dhamma in our hearts. So be well, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Bhante.